All right, very good. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you all to Enabling the Undamming, a GIS perspective on the Klamath River project. This is one of a series of webinars that we've been running over the last few years under the California Geographic Information System, or Information Association, CGIA. Check us out at cgia.org. Great bunch of folks. You can see some of the sponsors that are involved, and wanted to just let you know about a few things that are taking place upcoming with CGIA. On May the 15th, we've got a community forum on California roads sharing program, and Tracy's going to drop these links into the chat. On May the 22nd, Navigating Promotions. This is a professional development workshop. And again, the email for details is in the chat. And on July the 31st and August 1st is the California Native American Tribal GIS Summit. Donna Miranda Begay, who is part of our board, is the coordinator for that. And it's appropriate in timing because we're going to get a tribal GIS perspective today in our presentation. Also wanted to let you know that CGIA has awards that are given each year, and that we've extended the deadline to May the 18th. You can see the categories for awards, which are presented at the Esri UC. And again, you can find details in the chat. So by way of introduction, I'd like to give a little bit of background and context. For the past few decades, I've studied, mapped, and led student field trips throughout the Klamath Mountains region, which is characterized by high biodiversity, equally diverse geology and topography and climates. Before settlers flooded into California, the region hosted a rich variety of indigenous tribes, most of the cultures centered around the abundance of salmon and the use of fire to maintain forest health for game and useful plants. Historically, logging and mining were mainstays of the economy, but today tourism and cannabis are increasingly significant. This image looking down on the Klamath River is taken from the Pacific Crest Trail. Today, the region remains comparatively remote and sparsely populated, especially in comparison to other parts of California. The quantity and quality of water is a significant resource of the Klamath watershed, much of which is diverted to the massive Central Valley Water Project for California, and much of the territory of the region is under public lands, including extensive national forest and wilderness areas. Wildfires have ravaged the region in recent years, resulting in loss of life, siltation of rivers, destruction of property, denuding of forests, and hollowing out of communities as survivors seek housing and livelihoods outside of the region. This is posing a risk to the future of many of these rural communities, and you can actually see the effects of some of the recent fires in the image here. Amid these changes, the Klamath River has been the site of what has been called the world's largest dam removal project, getting worldwide press. Many have welcomed the prospect of a rebound of salmon numbers and improved health of the rivers. Recently, the commercial salmon season was again canceled under dwindling populations. Yet others in the region have bemoaned the disruption that dam removal will bring to economies and communities, with many holding suspicions of the influence of outsiders. And finally, I just want to encourage all of you to visit the Klamath River and the Klamath Mountains region, go rafting, fishing, hiking, camping, or simply drive along scenic Highway 96. You'll find it remarkably beautiful, and you will be supporting communities that live in the region. And with that, I'm excited to be able to welcome Nick Caselli, who is a branch manager and project manager with the Yurok Tribe's Fishery Department. He's been a GIS user for over 24 years, dating way back to ArcMap 3. So yeah, we get to reminisce about the old days of GIS, I guess. GIS has been a common thread throughout his work that's included government agencies, private industry, and independent GIS, and as an independent GIS consultant and cartographer and a wildland fire GIS specialist on incident management teams. He's been with the Yurok tribe for the last 2 years. And we're also going to have Kea Ray, who is a Yurok tribal member and restoration geologist with the Yurok Fisheries Department. She's been a GIS user for 3 years and has a degree from Humboldt in geology with a minor in Native American studies. And so with that, I am going to go ahead and hand over the share. And I'd like to encourage everyone to put questions in the chat. We'll field questions after we hear from our presenters. So Nick, you're up. You're on mute at the moment.
Okay, got me now. And I'm just going to go ahead and get to a slideshow share. Apologies for the delay here. Okay, Dan, you've got my presentation up, I believe.
That looks good, Nick.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, hi everyone. Gonna talk a bit primarily about the Yurok tribe's involvement in dam removal activities and our use of GIS throughout the process. I'll firstly say that, dam removal obviously has been a huge effort, multi-agency, multi-entity. There's been a lot of moving parts and a lot of things going on, and we've primarily played a supporting role in some of the work that's been done by the prime dam removal contractors. There's 3 of those I should acknowledge. McMillan, well, firstly, the greater project is managed. I'll just stop my video and go to the screen share. The greater project is managed by the Klamath River Renewal Corporation. That's a nonprofit that was stood up to manage dam removal. Under KRRC is McMillan, which is the engineering lead. Under that is Res, the restoration contractor, and Hewitt, which led all the civil heavy construction of the project itself. So we were brought in by McMillan and by Res to support their activities from a geospatial and a construction and other perspectives. So yeah, let's see if I can get to my next screen. Apologies. Are you guys, there we go. All right, so maybe a quick overview would be good for folks who aren't from the area. So basically there were 4 dams that were removed. Just for context, Klamath Falls would be to the northeast of the screen here. Wairika would be to the southeast. The oldest of these dams, Kopko, had been in around 100 years. The newest, Iron Gate, I believe, went in the 50s and the 60s was a construction phase. I won't get into any details as far as like the benefits they provided. Obviously, there's a lot of political opinions for or against dam removal with pros and cons to both. Just going to really focus on kind of the nuts and bolts of the project. So farthest upstream in Oregon, we've got the Oregon border here. Folks, can you see my pointer? Great. J.C. Boyle was the smallest of the dams. It was a hydro project. Moving downstream, we have what's called Hell's Corner Gorge, Klamath River Canyon, crosses into California. This reach was undammed. and then you get into the Kopko dams and Iron Gate. Kopko is actually two smaller reservoirs, the main Kopko Lake, and just below it was a diversion dam, Kopko 2, which was pretty small. And that came out first and was relatively quick. And then we have Iron Gate Reservoir below that. Take note of between the two, we'll revisit that later. That's a section called Ward's Canyon, or traditionally was known as Kikacéki Canyon. And we did some work in there. There's kind of an interesting background. So yeah, the 4 dams, Kopko 2 came out 2 years ago, and the other 3 were removed within the last year. Okay, I've got a couple slides just kind of with a brief overview. You know, again, this was a multi-entity effort. I would say GIS was a common thread throughout, all the way from early stages of planning to public outreach to, you know, engineering and civil construction side. I would say any contractor, any entity involved with this project, I'm sure GIS was a big part of their daily workflows and their daily routines. So we came in on a lot of data collection, geomatics and surveying related projects for Res and McMillan, but also we're transitioning into restoration and we're involved in that as well. So I outlined kind of 6 activities to highlight that we were involved with. And I'll dive into a little more details here in a minute. The first is just pre and post removal aerial data collection. We do aerial LiDAR ortho imagery collection with fixed wing, and we did surveys of the reservoir footprints prior to and post removal and drawdown. We also collect bathymetry data with sonar from boats, and we did a couple studies which I'll get into. One is continuing tracking sediment deposition and depth in the river channels. We did a tree removal project in Ward's Canyon, which involved some geospatial components, mapping what happened in there. And then as we proceeded into drawdown and removal, we did a slope stability monitoring project for McMillan during drawdown. We were involved with kind of routine fixed wing and drone monitoring of the landscape there. And probably where we were most involved, and what Kaya is going to get into more details of here in a bit, was revegetation of the former reservoir footprints. That's been a multi-year process and will continue for quite some time. So I'll briefly touch on a few of these activities. First, I just highlighted 2 phases, bathymetric data collection. So in 2018, the river channels below the reservoirs were surveyed by the Bureau of Reclamation. Also, prior to dam removal, bathymetry of the reservoirs was surveyed by another entity. So we had some changes in river channels just prior to dam removal, mostly caused by the McKinney fire and the large amounts of sediment inputs into the river just below Iron Gate Dam. And so to kind of reestablish a baseline, Res enlisted us to do basically kind of another baseline check on the river profiles below it. So we listed some local river guides, did essentially cross sections. We did about 268 cross sections for 80 river miles below the former Iron Gate Reservoir to establish kind of a new baseline of the channel there. Currently, we're involved in data collection to develop a bathymetric surface for the new river channels, you could say, within the reservoir footprints. We started in fall last year of some single and multi-beam data collection in a couple test locations, and we're within the next couple weeks, we'll be kind of starting that project back up as the flows subside, and we'll be collecting data within all 3, or rather all 4 reservoirs. lot of challenges with that we've been encountering and kind of figuring out as we go along. Access is difficult. There's new sections of the river that no one who's alive today has seen or navigated before. So that's been a challenge to learn our way through some of that and figure out equipment and practices and takeouts and things like that. And some of the sections involve fairly challenging whitewater. So a lot of challenges there. Okay, and just a little bit about our structure. So the Yurok tribe has a really capable geomatics and surveying division. We utilize drones, a couple fixed wings airplanes, and we've got onboard LiDAR and ortho sensors. So prior to dam removal, during drawdown and continuing, we're doing survey grade, capturing imagery, LiDAR point clouds, and processing those into DTMs and DEMs of the former reservoir footprints. That's going to be continuing. Those are kind of happening at regular fixed intervals. For every hour flown and hour of data collected, I think it's important to mention that there's a lot of background work that goes into it. The processing is fairly labor intensive. We might be able to get out and collect data for an entire reservoir in a day or two, but there's going to be many days and weeks of follow up after the fact to actually come up with a usable product. And then prior to the flights, there's a lot of groundwork that needs to happen as well, aside from just the flight planning. To get our survey grade accuracy, we need to establish ground control throughout our area of interest. And so that involves, checking known monuments, setting up survey targets. Any individual flight could take a week or two of ground survey crews setting control before the flight can happen. All right. And we don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to kind of breeze through these, although there's a lot. So we talked about Ward's Canyon earlier. Ward's Canyon has kind of an interesting history. So the purpose of COPCO 2 was to basically divert water through a canal and into a penstock where gravity generated energy and that generated electricity at the top of Iron Gate Dam, or at the top of Iron Gate Lake at the old powerhouse. Since the water from this section of the Klamath River in Ward's Canyon had mostly been diverted, as there was as much as like 200 or 300 CFS flowing, sometimes less, sometimes more. But basically, we had this river channel that had 100 years of no natural flows, no flood flows, and large trees, basically a mature forest, grew up in Ward's Canyon since COPCO 2 was constructed. That creates obvious hazards to boaters, things like that. There was risk of maybe this big raft of trees cutting loose during a large flood event, making its way downstream, damaging infrastructure. So the decision was made to remove all those trees. Fairly remote, fairly tough access. Crews, including the Yurok tribe, cut all the trees in the river channel. Those were flown out by helicopter. A lot are being used for restoration projects. And then after the fact, that exposes this channel bed, and we did basically the as-built maps of Ward's Canyon post-tree removal. So access, again, is difficult. We used a LiDAR, an imagery system mounted on a large drone to collect data. Took a little while to establish ground control, some tough hiking in there, and also surveyed in cross sections. And then that data was used to create as-built surfaces. A couple of the images here. This one in the bottom right would just be an example of a classified point cloud where the green is vegetation surfaces, the the orange is ground, and the blue is the water surface. So that's just an individual cross section. That's the kind of product we can achieve with this technology. And then the top right image is basically the ortho draped over the DEM surface. Okay, and I've got a few slides on this because this was a particularly interesting project that really tied together, a lot of aspects of surveying, geology, and data collection and data processing. So drawdown was a pretty exciting time, to say the least. Basically, they blew a hole in the old adit and Klamath Dam, and once that hole was created, drawdown was essentially uncontrolled, and there was no way to turn it off and stop it. So it happened pretty fast. Estimates are probably between 10 to 20 vertical feet of drop in Kopko Lake during drawdown. So pretty impressive. And when you're getting 15 or 17 feet of vertical drop, this horizontal landscape is just emerging by the hour. So during drawdown, there was some safety concerns. Luckily, none of those really ever came to fruition. But there's quite a few residences along Kopko Lake. There were some that were identified as possibly at risk of slope stability issues during drawdown because it was due to happen so rapidly. And basically, some of the residents were given the option to kind of self-evacuate during drawdown. Some elected to do so. I would say most of them stayed. But the concern, well, really there are two concerns. So one is that there's this layer of there's a sediment layer, old lake deposits of kind of like a diatomaceous earth of sorts. There's a layer of that with volcanics sitting on top of that and sitting on other material. So with drawdown happening so rapidly, the concern that was, maybe those slopes would dewater less quickly than the reservoir itself, and that could sort of pull the rug out from underneath it, and you could have blocks of material moving, potentially with homes on them, sliding and endangering the structures or the residents. The other potential concern is in the photo here, you've got these sediments which were deposited within Kopko Lake, is that some of this progressive erosion, slumping, and head cutting could work its way into the existing properties and destabilize them. So we were brought in by Macmillan to assist them with monitoring and analysis during drop down of risk to these residents. And and I'll get into how that went. So prior to drawdown, we used the same drone technology, LiDAR and ortho, to establish a pre-drawdown surface to be able to difference and compare against. That also involved quite a bit of ground control. In photo in the top left, you can see some of the slumping and failures in the lake bed sediments, and then with those steeper slopes behind them. And then during drawdown, it happened to be a pretty rainy couple weeks, so that made it a little tricky to get the drone up. But during drawdown, as many times as we could, we would fly the drone, process, collect data, and basically developed a time series of surfaces to be able to evaluate, not just for obvious changes, but maybe for slope movement or earth movement that might be not so obvious to the observer. And then also during drawdown, we did routine just aerial oblique imagery to kind of support the field reconnaissance and any of our observations we got from the GIS data. So with repeat sets of data, we were able to help do some comparisons. So essentially, we can difference the rasters against each other and try to identify areas of slope movement. In the photo here, this is the Copco rim, sort of the residential rim that the homes were on. This area right here is one of those failures that's pretty evident in the old lake bed sediments. So, you can't necessarily have like one without the other. So we were looking for areas that both had an elevation loss and a gain. So this is one of those slumps that were visible in the photos. Aside from that, we also created a bunch of different cross sections, and then the cross sections could be compared, cross section by cross section, foot by foot, and see if there was any deformation that would be alarming and be worth looking into further. Okay, kind of getting more into what's happening now. We're also involved in a lot of different restoration projects, both as a subcontractor for res and under a grant with other tribal entities and agencies. We've been doing some other fixed wing flights, both for just repeat oblique aerial imagery and also using a thermal infrared array, which we have on a Cessna 182, to collect multispectral data. We can then use that multispectral data to try to identify refugia, hotspots, basically thermal changes in the tributaries that go into the former reservoirs and into the Klamath, and identify, likely targets for fish refugia, areas where we may want to avoid, areas where we may want to target. This platform is kind of nice because it doesn't necessarily generate survey grade data. It was designed for mapping wildfires. So the level of precision and detail isn't as good as what we have on our 208, but it gives us really good kind of higher level reconnaissance data. So that's the sensor array in the bottom left. This would be, this little ribbon here is basically the river corridor through all the former reservoirs. This was collected in a single flight, in a single pass. Our resolution varies depending on how far you get from the center of the river, but fairly decent resolution. We've got an oblique image there. And then looking at some of the thermal data, this is an example of just kind of in the post-processing in ArcGIS after it's been through Agisoft. And then we can generate some derivative products. This is sort of a hybrid map of basically heat. You can see obviously the colder Klamath River, some canals and other colder features, and then shading from trees. This is basically has been calibrated and converted to Celsius. And then this would just be essentially one of the raw long wave infrared images. This is Spencer Creek, which flows into former J.C. Boyle Reservoir, and darker is colder, and you can fairly clearly see this cold water of Spencer Creek flowing in, hitting the Klamath, making its way kind of along the bank downstream until it hits a rock bar, and then it's mixing into the warmer Klamath River water. Okay, and then really our largest lift on this project, we led with some other entities and other tribes, the revegetation effort for the former reservoirs. Our ecologist lead couldn't be here on this call. He's really led that effort, but yeah, it's been quite the project. Started several years before removal with invasive species eradication, seed collection, germination. Really had to hit it hard during removal to try to get vegetation established in the footprints before invasive species could take over. And throughout this project, GIS was really central to management of it. Everything from analysis and planning to really to tracking of, a large team of field workers who are out there planting acorns, planting seeds, and kind of doing the hard work and the dirty work of getting native species established in these footprints. We're going to get into a little more detail on that, since that was really our focus and continues to be. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Kaya, who was involved as a kind of a GIS specialist supporting these teams in Kopko, Iron Gate, and JC Boyle. And there'll be some time for questions after Kaya's presentation.
Did you want me to share my screen? Okay, never mind.
Sure, if you're having trouble, you can just say next slide, but yeah, go ahead.
And
Okay.
I was just going to say, feel free to enter questions into the chat. We'll field questions after Kaya's presentation.
Okay. So the picture on the right is a drone imagery that I took in June 2024 just to show how green the vegetation is now. And the revegetation goals were to go in and plant native vegetation in these former reservoirs to minimize the sediment erosion and to help the salmon habitat development and the geomorphic stability. The technology that we used during this revegetation effort was the ArcGIS online dashboard, ArcGIS Pro, and field maps. So the dashboard was used for res to keep them updated on the revegetation efforts that the crews were doing. Arc Pro was used to make edits to these field map layers that I will get into. And then field maps is what the revegetation crews use out in the field for the seeding, monitoring, and planning. So this is an example of what field maps looks like in your cell phone. So when the crews are out and they want to collect a point, this is example in Kopko. So they'll pick this blue plus sign to collect a point. So they have these options of acorn planting and planting areas. So one of the layers that they don't edit is planting areas in seeding zones. Those are what the ecologist makes prior to them going out in the field. So they know where they're planting seeds or planting acorns within these reservoirs. The ones that they do make edits and add are seeding tracks, the clusters, the acorn planting, the IEV, and willows. So these points are like all of those of what they see in their field maps to know what areas they have completed already. And in the live seeding track, so this is the seeding zones that they had to complete in Kopko Reservoir. So these are showing what type of seeds they had to go in these polygons. And then this is an example of the live seeding tracks of, so I would put this layer into Arc Pro and edit it to get rid of these straight lines. These straight lines are from if they leave the polygon or if they leave and their phone turns on to connect to service, it'll make straight lines. Or if they just forget to turn off their live tracking, they'll just track them around. So I would go into Arc Pro and edit these lines by snipping or merging or just digitizing lines myself because they just don't turn out right or they're just not correct. So this is what the live seeding tracks looks like after I go in and edit them to the polygons. And the numbers are the weeks. So like week 1 is when they first started and week 7 is when they stopped seeding in these areas. So this seeding tracking was this fall 2024, which was only 7 weeks long, while 2023 was 12 weeks long. And so the acorn planting they planted 320 clusters with 25,585 acorns. These acorns were Oregon white oaks. So there was 156 clusters in the Iron Gate Reservoir, and there was 164 clusters in Kopko. So these like little brown dots are all the little clusters that were planted in these two reservoirs. And then this is a picture of what it looks like out in the field when they're planting these clusters. So this picture is from Kopko. And in these clusters, there's like 3 acorns per clump, and these are separated into 3 holes when planting. So this is the dashboard that Res will look at when they want update of the revegetation efforts. So it shows the acres that has been planted or seeded within the 3 reservoirs, so Iron Gate, Kopko, and JC Boyle. And it also shows the seeding and planting polygons while showing the edited version of the re-veg tracks. And it tells them how many acorns were planted, how many seeds were used, and then it shows the workers. So on the revegetation crews, there were between 15 to 20 people working. So we keep track of who was seeding that week or that day, and just keeping track of what areas need to be seeded and what areas have been seeded. So the invasive exotic vegetation, the IEV, was to minimize the invasives abundance at all the registration sites and to maintain invasive species free zones around roads, staging areas. While they're out mapping, all the mapping is done by the revegetation crews. So when they're out mapping, they identify 53 species, and 23 of them were the priority species, and the remaining 30 will be like on the watch list. So when they're out doing future surveys, if they identify one of these species on the watch list, they will make a plan to come back and treat that species. So in this picture on the left is the revegetation crews doing that treatment. So they're pulling these invasive species off this hill slope. And then this is an example of what they will fill in for one of the points that they take. So one of these points, they're filling in where what reservoir they're in, what species and the population of the species. And these are just the points that they collected in Kopko. And then we have the live tracking for this too, so that they know what areas they have already searched for these invasive species, so that we make sure that we are checking for invasives everywhere we can. And in willows, we started this year. So the revegetation crews went out to do the mapping for the willows. So they went into all 3 reservoirs, identifying willows that could be harvested for future restoration projects. And so this is an example of what these points look like. So they're putting in the same thing, what reservoir, site name, and species of that willow. And then this is a picture with Iron Gate, with Scotch and Camp Creek right here. And then we have a picture of the willows, what one of these willow plants look like out in Kopko. And all of these layers are made within Field Map Designer. So we'll make these maps for the revegetation crews to go out and do this on an offline map for them. So what I do is edit and add new polygons for our ecologists and do I'll test out these field maps to make sure they're working correctly for the revegetation crews to have it easy going when mapping out in the field. And then we wanted to leave off with a picture of the salmon in Jenny Creek from last year in October. got the chance to go out there and fly the drone to take these pictures. And we'll do questions now.
Well, thank you, Kaya and Nick. That was fascinating. And yeah, we'll take a few minutes for questions. So please do enter your questions into the chat. There's a few that have been entered in thus far. I'll just read these, and either Nick or Kaya, you can field the question. The first one was, given the remote locations of the work, was data used within field maps offline compatible? And if so, were offline areas made by the user or were they pre-packaged?
Sure, I can take this since I kind of built a lot of those applications. So yeah, that was a big challenge for us. Most of the work areas are out of cell service. There's large amounts of data getting collected, a lot of photos getting taken. So yes, we had to make everything offline compatible. And if you've used field maps, you'll know that to be able to do that, there's a lot of settings and configuration, especially when you're building the original data. Just basically a lot of settings and a lot of syncing settings. And yeah, there's some settings that can basically break the whole thing if you're not careful. So yes, it did have to be offline compatible. And so that was a big challenge. There was some late nights and some weekend work, fixing broken maps and applications. And also, yes, we generally would make prepackaged offline maps to try to make them as small as possible from a data perspective. But most of the workers were trained that if they were having issues with an offline map, they were shown how to build their own offline map in the application.
Very good. So Jill asked the question, I've seen tremendous revegetation of oak woodlands done by birds that bury acorns. Have you considered bird surveys to track their services?
That's a good question. That would probably be one for Josh, our senior ecologist. He's probably pretty savvy to this. So yeah, I don't really have an answer to that one, but I'm sure it was considered. And Rez's scientist has also been involved too. So I'll make a note. I'm curious about that as well. We'll follow up with Josh.
Very good. And I see a question about if the Yurok tribe owns its plains, and it looks like Forrest was able to at least partly answer that question. Do you want to add anything to that, Nick? Are they some of these contractors that are brought in, or is most of the equipment owned by the tribe?
Sure, yeah. So the Yurok tribe basically has a couple arms of the tribe. They have the Yurok Tribe Construction Corporation and Condor Aviation. And so these are tribal-owned enterprises. And so the Condor Aviation owns the airplanes that we use to do this surveying. All of the UAVs, all of the drones, we own in the fisheries department. And let's see here. There's another question. So many kinds of temporal remote sensing data. Yeah. How are we storing and managing it all? That is a big challenge. Data is easy to collect, hard to store and process. So especially all the remote sensing data, most of it's stored or archived on a server at our main fisheries office in Arcata, and then it's transferred to the clients as well. But it's all stored and archived and processed there.
You mentioned, Nick, the Arcata office, and of course the dam removal sites was far upriver. And I was thinking of a question for KF as a tribal member. Do you have a perspective on how most tribal members live closer to the mouth of the Klamath in Requa or down in sort of the North Coast area? And do you have a sense of sort of that connectivity between this remote dam removal site and yeah, are people going up to visit the site? Do they have a sense of what's going on? What's the perception that you've seen among your fellow tribal members on the project itself?
I see, like, I grew up on the mouth of the Klamath my whole life. So for me personally, moving to Wairika to work on these project sites was a challenge just because I miss going out and seeing the mouth. It just feels like a different environment from being on the coast to being more inland in Wairika. And back home, I see people come to make trips just to see this. Like when drawdowns were first happening, there was groups like they had like a little page, or they'll send like an email or text people saying, "Oh, we're gonna go up. Does anybody want to jump in to go check out this dam removal or see drawdown?" So it was like really nice to see people from back home come up here and see this change because some of them were a part of it. And it's just something that they didn't think they'll see in their lifetime. So all these elders got in this van, came up here and did a tour, because you could do like a Copco road takes you all around. So they did that big circle, and it's like nice to see that they got to see this in their lifetime.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I'm not sure if everyone's aware of this. I had the opportunity to go to the dam removal celebration in Arcata, and they were showing these pictures of this, what was at least a 20-year effort to raise awareness of what had happened in the river and to how it had affected the cultures along the river. And so really inspiring to see that, that work unfolding. Thanks for sharing that. We do have a couple of other questions. James asks if the surveying products are available, and Jesse, what type of GPS systems were used for the drone control points?
Yeah, I'm happy to take those. So the survey products, I would say at this point in time, are not generally publicly available. They're owned by KRC or their subcontractors. There are some products that may eventually become available, like on OpenTopo now. You can get the bathymetry data, the reservoir bathymetry data that was collected in 2018. So some of this may be eventually published, but right now it's kind of project specific and owned by these various entities. So unfortunately not, but hopefully one day it'll be published. Then Jesse asks what kind of GPS systems were used for establishing the control points. Basically, we use Trimble products, and depending on connectivity, we might establish a new control point or use an existing monument. And whenever possible, we're using RTK. But we may be doing occasional static shots if we can't communicate to the base.
Will has added a question in as well. Did you already have a lot of expertise you needed to collect and use the data between Condor Aviation and the Yurok Fisheries Department, or did you learn over the course of the project as well?
I'm sure there's a little bit of learning curve, especially for individual staff, but the leadership in the geomatics and surveying branch, I mean, they're, licensed engineers, and Court, the lead of that branch, he came in from a geospatial consultancy, actually did quite a bit of the mapping of the reservoir footprints and the dams pre-dam removal. And so he came in with quite a bit of expertise. So, definitely a little bit of both. There's always a learning curve, but folks leading those efforts came in with a pretty strong background. I think some of the learning curves come more from integrations of the systems with the aircraft and things like that. But as far as from the surveying itself, had a pretty strong foundation going into it.
Nick, I wonder if you could speak to the mapping or monitoring of suspended sediments and water quality in general downstream of the dam removal sites.
Yeah, sure. So, there's a lot of folks involved in that, tribes, federal agencies. That hasn't really been a focus of ours, other than collecting baseline data. Obviously there's a lot of sediment hung up in these reservoirs. A lot of that was mobilized during drawdown, immediately afterwards, and continues to be mobile. There's studies going on with the USGS. The Karuk tribe has a pretty robust monitoring program, a lot of stations, a lot of telemetry that measure turbidity. If you're looking for a specific resource for that, the Karuk tribe's water quality website, they've compiled really good links to a lot of the monitoring stations, and you can check out turbidity, temperature, other parameters like that in real time. But yeah, obviously sediment mobility and transport is huge interest to a lot of people, and there's a lot of studies going on. And I think in the 2 to 5 year range, we're going to see a lot of papers getting published that tracked it. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Justin asks if there are various sucker species that provide cultural and ecological value have been observed in addition to salmonids.
That's a good question that I don't really have an answer to. I'm a geologist, so that'd be one for a fish bio. Maybe there's someone in the chat room that might have more info. But yeah, I know salmon get all the a lot of the attention, but consideration for other species, including suckers, steelhead, lamprey, that's been a focus of restoration and monitoring as well. But yeah, I don't know about any observations of them, but definitely Chinook and coho and steelhead have been observed.
Okay, I wonder if you could speak to maybe learning learning experiences that you've had from this. You mentioned that you've been with working for the last year doing GIS since you graduated, and CGIA likes to support both sort of people that are further into their career and also early career GIS folks. So any lessons learned from your time doing this? Any surprises?
For me, being able to take breaks. Sometimes when I first started, I had some idea of what I was doing, but not really. So most of the time I was just going for it, trying to do my best and watching a lot of YouTube videos. So it's okay to just take a break and walk away is what I learned. It's gonna be there when I get back. Nothing's gonna change. I'm just gonna get more mad looking at it than actually trying to fix what I'm doing. Or sometimes I'll break something and I'm like, I have to start all over. So it was definitely a learning process, and to be patient when I'm trying to map or do GIS. And I had some experience prior, but it was different experience where I was just mapping geomorphic features. So doing GIS for the revegetation crew was a lot different, where I was making these layers for the crews to go out and making sure they won't break on them because of me, or it just felt like just taking breaks when you're doing GIS is what I say.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I've got a few of my students that are in on the call, and I'm sure they probably appreciate hearing that. And I was talking to somebody about this recently, reflecting back on the early part of my career, and I think most of us that have been doing GIS or other things for a while kind of remember those early sort of right out of school years where it's still a steep learning curve, and all of us had mentors that sort of helped us along in those days, and it's part of the learning process and just being persistent and patient. And yeah. getting up and
Yeah.
taking walks. That sounds like good advice. All right. Well, do either of you have any final things you'd like to say before we wrap up? Any other questions?
Oh, I was just gonna thank you, Dan, for hosting this. And yeah, if anyone has questions, feel free to reach out. I know the slides kind of alluded to it. We've just played a small part in this multi-agency, multi-tribal, multi-entity effort, and yeah, it's been great to be a part of it. Both have a front row seat and play a small part in moving this project forward.
Yeah, and thanks for pointing out the fact that, I think this is one of the aspects that is so innovative about this is this collaboration between state and federal agencies, the tribes, nonprofit organizations, community organizations, and on down the line. So let's do a revisit on this in a couple of years, and we'll see how things are progressing. So yeah, thanks again to Kaya and Nick. And I did want to thank all of you guys for attending and to encourage you to check out at cgia.org. And we've got some upcoming events that I had mentioned, and you can always check those things out on the website. And wanted to also thank my fellow engagement community committee chair, Tracy Tober, who's going to be taking over the chair of CGIA from Roland Martin, who's provided us with good leadership moving forward. So thanks again for your time, and take care.